This year, something previously unthinkable is happening. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is building one of their own chapels in Short Creek, previously the headquarters for the FLDS tradition. Now, the fundamentalist Mormon tradition, those who still practice polygamy, and especially the more extreme versions like the tradition led by Warren Jeffs, now imprisoned for sexually assaulting children, gets a lot of attention. And that's why Short Creek, that tradition's hub, is one of the best known Mormon locations in America, only behind maybe Salt Lake City and Provo. And the Latter-day Saint Church, as a result, had long distanced itself from that region, seeing it as a wasteland, a place that could not really be redeemed. But that's changing. In this video, I want to talk about the century-long history of Short Creek, the rise of the fundamentalist movement, as well as their decline, and talk about why this LDS chapel being built, constructed now with wards that are going to start meeting there this year in 2025, are symbolic of these broader changes. Let's dig in. Now, I've done previous videos on the long, uneven, and awkward end to LDS polygamy, but to refresh on one particular moment, in 1933, when J. Reuben Clark joins the LDS First Presidency, he and the LDS President Heber J. Grant decided it's finally time to cut off this growing circle of polygamists within the faith, those who claimed that the church was wrong in giving up polygamy, and so were still secretly entering into new polygamous relationships. So in the summer of 1933, they issue a First Presidency statement that comes to be known as the Third Manifesto, which promises we are going to cut off everyone who continues to align with this fundamentalist group. But instead of killing that movement, which the First Presidency hoped they would do, it ended up sparking a consolidation, a formalization of those polygamists who soon become known as fundamentalists. They're led by what was called the Council of Friends, with several leaders like John and Lauren Woolley, who claimed that they were part of the council ordained by John Taylor all the way back in the 1880s. But by 1935, the Woolleys had passed, and John Y. Barlow, this guy, pleasant-looking fellow, was now the leader of the Council of Friends. And he decided that they were going to send several of their members to colonize and settle, hopefully beyond the arm of the law, in a region known as Short Creek, which is a community that borders the southern Utah and northern Arizona boundaries. Within months, you had several dozens of these polygamists moving down to the Short Creek community, joining an already present small farming community with some LDS and joining those LDS congregations. At one point, LDS authorities were sent down to Short Creek and forced everyone in the community to sign loyalty oaths to the LDS church, that they were not aligning with the fundamentalists, and those who refused to sign were excommunicated. Again, another attempt to squash this polygamous movement that only led to a former cementing. And soon Short Creek became a stronghold, not the headquarters, but a stronghold for this growing fundamentalist movement. By the way, if you enjoy this type of history, this geeking out about where we've come from, where we are now, and how that might tell us where we're going in the future, please make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Every Wednesday, like today, I post videos that connect the past and the present. On Mondays, I do deep dive on particular historical topics. And on Fridays, I peel back the curtains to help you understand the historical background of some important topics so that you too can become an expert. And if you are so interested and you want to have a way to give back to this channel so we can continue doing this, consider becoming a member. Becoming a member gives you a few perks like early access to videos, symbols next to your names when you comment so I can make sure to respond, and it shows that this conversation is worth doing. So let's get back to the history. But the LDS Church and state authorities in Utah and Arizona still wanted to find a way to end this polygamous community because, again, polygamy was illegal by state laws in both Utah and Arizona. So they coordinated, the church and the two states, in raids in 1935, 1944, and 1953. And that 1953 raid was the biggest and in many ways the most consequential. 102 Arizona troopers drove into Short Creek in 1953 and arrested nearly the entire population of the community, the 122 adults and 263 children. While they believed that this was a way to finally stamp out the illegal polygamous activities, it ended up being a PR catastrophe. 150 of those children weren't returned to their families for years, and photographs like this one were taken and spread by the media that quickly drew sympathy for these polygamists as a marginalized and outcast, which the LDS Church, who had supported the raid, were probably feeling like, oh, now you're sympathizing with these polygamists who are being prosecuted and persecuted by the federal government. And it ended up being a disaster for the Arizona governor, who arranged all of this. And soon afterward, the Short Creek community was renamed to try to distance themselves from the national media, with the Utah portion of the community now being known as Hilldale, and this Arizona portion of the community now being known as Colorado City. Now, the fundamentalists, once they were released from prison by promising that they'll stop practicing polygamy, they didn't. This is a long history of civil disobedience against the federal rules that they saw as an oppression and an infringement upon their religious freedom acts, just like John Taylor did in the 1880s, continued long after the 1953 raid. However, the fundamentalist movement then faced a number of schisms and divisions. This is one of the most important points that I wish the national media and national audience knew more about, is that there's no one Mormon fundamentalist movement. There are many, and many of these schisms originated in the 1950s era. There are some, especially whenever there's a death of one LDS leader. This should sound familiar, given I've talked about the succession crisis following Joseph Smith. There were succession crises within the fundamentalist movement. For instance, in the 1950s, a group of fundamentalists ended up following Rulon Allred during a split within the Council of Friends to set up their headquarters in Bluffdale, which is up between Salt Lake City and Provo. If you're driving around the corner of the mountain, you might see their large chapel out to the west. They are often seen as maybe the more progressive, although progressive on a spectrum. They're the Browns of the Sister Wives series come from this AUB, the Apostolic United Brethren. And then another group end up remaining in Short Creek, and they, decades later, become officially organized as the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the FLDS. These are the people that often get captured in the national attention. But even in that FLDS tradition, there has been a lot of evolution. Now, throughout that period, they had been practicing, especially for those who lived in Short Creek, which was a hub, but not the only hub at this point. They had been practicing the United Effort Plan, which was their version of a law of consecration, a united order in which they are pooling their resources together, which is a way to consolidate authority and property and belongings, which sets up a set of authoritarian demands. This paves the way for the fundamentalist tradition, the FLDS tradition, eventually evolving toward a one-man rule type of authority. This is a tradition that produces both Rulon Jeffs and then later Warren Jeffs. And importantly, under those two leaders, the father and son, Rulon and Warren, they introduced a number of retrenchments for the FLDS tradition, becoming much stricter, wearing the pioneer garb, avoiding certain colors that are associated with Satan, and restricting the rights of women and pulling people out of public schools. Those ideas that have long been identified with the fundamentalist movement and popular media were often recent inventions within that fundamentalist tradition. And it's during that retrenchment that Short Creek increasingly becomes the hub for that movement. So Short Creek becomes the symbol, the visual, physical, geographic location for the retrenched FLDS tradition as led by Rulon Jeffs and then Warren Jeffs. So by the early 21st century, Short Creek is no longer identified in the national media as a place for these persecuted, marginalized groups like in the wake of the 1953 raid, but as the symbol of authoritarian backward religion. Even the red rocks that tower over the Short Creek community become a symbol for the intractable, indomitable authoritarian spirit. That's why those rocks appear on many of the exposés from those who escaped the FLDS tradition. It's why it was on the cover of John Krakauer's book, Under the Banner of Heaven, even though the Laffertys that the book tells never really lived in Short Creek. They had some affiliations with the Fundamentalists, but those mountains became synonymous with irrational, violent, authoritarian faith. That's what Short Creek came to symbolize. But then Short Creek starts changing. After Warren Jeff's, let's call them legal issues that got him into lots of hot water and keep him in prison, thankfully for the rest of his life, he is still in prison right now, the FLDS church starts scattering, dissolving. It's difficult to determine how many people are still a part of the FLDS church today, dropping from their tops of, over 10,000 a couple decades ago. And importantly, the government has taken action and has dissolved the UEP, the United Effort Project, that had gathered all the property and real estate for the FLDS tradition, and now divvied it up among those who are claiming that they were wronged. And so now Short Creek is no longer the hub of the FLDS tradition. Instead, it is a refuge and a gathering place for many people who have previously left the LDS faith, and now people who never had any attachment to the FLDS place. This is why the LDS Church is now able to have their growing community there and building a chapel, the first LDS congregation with a chapel in Short Creek in nearly a century. That's how much the Short Creek space has changed. I was very privileged to join a group of other over-specialized history nerds to take a tour of Short Creek a little over a year ago. That was led by the phenomenal historians of the Fundamentalist movement, Christina Rossetti, who wrote the award-winning biography of Joseph Musser, one of the early leaders of the Council of Friends that I strongly recommend reading, and Brian Buchanan, the co-host of the Sunstone Mormon History podcast, as well as an employee at Benchmark Books, the best Mormon history bookstore. Here's a picture of me and my fellow over-specialized nerds taking a tour. You can recognize the environment around us. But what struck me in taking the tour of Short Creek now is that it is very much taking a tour of a relic of what was rather than a testament of what is. And by that, I mean that the Short Creek that is known in the popular imagination is largely gone. And that's what's symbolized by the creation of the building of this LDS chapel in Short Creek, something that would have been unthinkable just a couple decades ago. Now, if you want to learn more about this fascinating history of Short Creek, I have a few recommendations, one book and two documentaries. The book is Martha Bradley Evans's book, Kidnapped from That Land, The Government Raids on the Short Creek Polygamists, and then two documentaries. The first is the Netflix documentary, Keep Sweet, which focuses on the FLDS tradition and Rulon and especially Warren Jeffs. I thought that documentary did really well on centering the lives of the victims in the story and providing a voice to the women. And the other recommendation is the Discovery Channel documentary, Keep Sweet. Same name, different documentary, but the Discovery Channel documentary, Keep Sweet, which is on the evolution of the Short Creek community. And it touches on how it has changed hands in recent years and is now becoming a refuge for those who have previously had to flee the authoritarianism of the FLDS tradition. I think this story, this history of Short Creek, is important to understand American and religious history and Mormon history, because it shows both the diversity of these Mormon religious experiences, as well as the power of change and evolution, and that you can't pigeonhole any of these traditions in a particular moment because they are continually evolving. That's my video. I hope it makes sense. Please like and share it if you did. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything. Please consider becoming a member of this channel if you want to find a way to give back. History has never been more relevant than it is today. And learning about these histories, what allows the LDS Church now to have a chapel in Short Creek, requires a deep understanding of where we've come from and hopefully give a sense of where we're going next.